Jordan's King Hussein is the Middle East's man in the middle tonight. Look at the map, geographically and politically. Jordan and King Hussein sit in the line of fire between Israel and Iraq, between peace and war. CBS News correspondent Doug Tennell is monitoring developments in the Jordanian capital of Amman. Doug?
You know, it wasn't too long ago, Dan, that most people here remained optimistic. It wasn't too many hours ago that they were still being almost entertained by the spectacle of Saddam Hussein, by watching this big Arab strongman on Iraqi TV who would hold the whole world on his very word and who would then crack jokes in the Iraqi dialect that only other Arabs would understand. But this is the land of deals, and when there was no deal, everything changed here dramatically, and it continues to change now. People are becoming afraid. This is the land in between, and the king in between. And all you have to do is look at the map to see that every time that Saddam Hussein threatens to attack Israel and Israel warns that it will retaliate, what that means is that Jordan will be in between. And so the king said last night that his army is on full alert. There are reports, too, that not too far over the border in Syria, troops have moved into the vicinity of the Golan Heights in the last few hours. And so everyone here is waiting. It's a nation that's holding its breath.
Doug Tennell, thanks. Joining us now for added context and perspective on the war and peace politics of the Middle East, CBS News consultant and our friend Fuad Ajami. Professor Ajami, we've talked about showdown. It's showdown time. Showdown for what?
Well, it's really showdown time. We take a look at this. Take a look at the stakes and take a look at the landscape. We now have a battle for the Arab future. It really is a battle for control of the Arab world. And the tragedy for the Americans, I think, this is a battle between Saddam Hussein and George Bush. This is a showdown between the local despot and the foreign savior. We have gone there because there was no local deterrent to Saddam Hussein. We have gone there because there was no Arab answer to him. There was no Saudi answer to him. There was no Egyptian answer to him. There was no Jordanian answer to him. Our man in Amman, Doug Tennell, tells us that the people in Amman felt excited by Saddam Hussein. It was a political thrill on the cheap. They thought it would never come to war. They would ride with Saddam, and then they would be spared the consequences of war.
This is the hour of decision. We've passed the midnight deadline. Give us some telltale signs to look for over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Well, I think King Hussein, who is a very articulate man and who has a way with language and who understands war and who has been through war, now says, in effect, that the ghost of war hangs over the Arab world. The ghost of war does hang over the Arab world. I think the one thing that people are now still looking for and hoping for, that perhaps if we are to be spared this coming war, that maybe Saddam Hussein will wait past January 15. Will say, look, I never respected this deadline. This was never my deadline. This was a deadline imposed on us by the U.S. This was a deadline that the U.S. imposed on the UN Security Council, and that he can wait 3 or 4 days, and this will be the decent interval. Without this decent interval delivering some magic dividend, I think then we're really looking at this war.
You've studied Saddam Hussein for a very long time. In the few seconds we have left, is there any real, viable possibility that he will yet swerve away?
Well, Saddam Hussein is a man who can turn on a dime. His record shows this. And really looking at him, you're looking at a quiet assassin who has both the willpower to go to war, and I think also, should he really choose to save his regime, then he can also find the means for a way out.
Fuad Ajami, thanks.
Thank you.
Leslie?
As preparations for war escalated today, so did the anti-war movement. Protesters demonstrated in virtually every major U.S. city. When we come back, we'll talk with some anti-war dissenters.
There is no end of scenarios at this hour for how a war could start. Little in the way of a scenario for stopping a war. Still, people hope and pray, and some people protest, including these people outside the White House tonight, holding a candlelight vigil for peace on into the wee hours of the morning. There's plenty of support, of course, around the country for President Bush's policies, but correspondent John Blackstone reports about some of the largest and loudest demonstrations of dissent today that took place out in the American West.
If one reason for going to war is to keep oil flowing, anti-war demonstrators have discovered one way to get attention is to stop traffic flowing. In San Francisco this afternoon, hundreds marched onto the double-deck Bay Bridge and stopped drivers between San Francisco and Oakland for 2 hours. Some didn't even complain.
I'm willing to sit and wait as long as it takes if we get the message across that we don't want war.
Demonstrators in Seattle used a similar tactic, marching onto the city's main freeway during this morning's commute.
People united will never be defeated.
In Olympia, the Washington state capitol, it was not motorists who were inconvenienced, it was state legislators. When the lawmakers took a break, protesters took over the chamber.
We're going to stay here until someone comes and talks to us.
In Albuquerque, George Bush was burned in effigy. In Berkeley, a new generation took to the streets, much to the satisfaction of a man who was at the center of many Vietnam protests, Wavy Gravy.
These are the good old days. Thank you.
Marchers at the Federal Building in Los Angeles listened to the Vietnam-era Pentagon Papers defendant, Tony Russo.
You are the non-violent army that is going to stop this war.
But in San Francisco, there were scuffles with police and more than 500 arrests. Demonstration organizers say this is just the beginning. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
We should note that a lot of other people in this world think going to war is a bad idea. 8,000 people marched against the war today in Frankfurt, 25,000 in Milan, 35,000 in Barcelona. We'll all be right back.
Looking ahead, now that the deadline has passed, in Baghdad, Iraqis woke up this morning to a radio broadcast, a repeat of a Saddam Hussein address warning that his army is ready for war and that there would be no compromise. With diplomacy apparently exhausted, world leaders made urgent appeals to Iraq to prevent war. Egyptian President Mubarak said, in the name of every father and mother, Iraq should leave Kuwait. We don't know if President Bush read his horoscope on deadline day, but it said, face obstreperous individual and refuse to be intimidated.
Well, at midnight Eastern Standard Time, a little while ago, we tore away the calendar page that said January 15 and passed in that instant from a safe, familiar time into a dangerous and unknowable one. Everybody in the world watched the moment approach with a kind of dread. The last message of the Secretary General of the United Nations to Saddam Hussein began, as 15 January advances and the world stands poised between peace and war, the Foreign Minister of France said late in the day, the fatal moment arrives. A GI in Saudi Arabia, Captain Clint Essery from Indianapolis, said, in our minds, the training stops now, the war starts. We have watched this midnight coming, and now it has passed. The remorseless passage of time, which we usually are too busy to think about, is an ancient theme in the Persian Gulf. A Persian, Omar the tent maker, composed an epigram for this breathless night nearly 1,000 years ago. The bird of time has but a little way to fly, and lo, the bird is on the wing.
And indeed he is, Charles. As we leave you at this hour, the men and women of CBS News Worldwide are standing by to bring you reliable, responsible, and steady coverage, day or night, of developments in the Gulf and to do their best to explain them. Night Watch will be coming up on many of these CBS stations. There'll be the CBS Morning News. Then Harry Smith and Paula Zahn will be here with CBS This Morning. We'll have the CBS Evening News tomorrow night, of course, and we hope you'll make a mental note, a special edition of 48 Hours about the Gulf tomorrow night. That'll be at 8 o'clock, 7 in the Central Time Zone, and we'll have other special coverage when warranted. Good night, Charles.
Good night, Dan. Good night, Leslie.
Night, gentlemen. Night, everyone.